Welcome to today's episode, where we explore the mysterious mass UFO sighting over the Canary Islands, Spain, in 1976, a notorious case for many compelling reasons. If you're not yet familiar with these events, now is the perfect time to delve deeper and explore the intriguing possibilities. Could it have been a secret U.S. thermonuclear missile launch, a rare and extraordinary atmospheric phenomenon, or perhaps something genuinely unearthly? It all began the night of June 22, 1976, when the crew of Atrevida, a Spanish Navy corvette stationed offshore, south of the island of Fuerteventura, observed a light rising off the coast. In his deposition, the captain reported the incident in the following words: "At 21:27 hours on June 22nd, we saw an intense yellowish-bluish light moving from the shore towards our position. Initially, we thought it was an aircraft with its landing lights on. Then, when the light reached an elevation of 15 to 18 degrees, it became stationary. The original light went out, and a luminous beam began to rotate, remaining for approximately 2 minutes. Then, an intense halo of yellowish and bluish light developed and stayed in the same position for 40 minutes, even though the original phenomenon was no longer visible." The captain continues, 2 minutes after the halo appeared, the light split into two parts, with the smaller part beneath, in the center of the luminous halo, where a blue cloud appeared. The upper part began to climb in a rapid and irregular spiral, and finally vanished. None of these movements affected the initial circular halo, which remained, lighting up parts of the land and ocean, indicating the phenomenon was close to us. The corvette captain's testimony was confirmed by a whole host of witnesses, among them a doctor from the island of Gran Canaria, residing in the town of Guia. We'll delve into his extraordinary experience shortly, but first, it's important to acknowledge the widespread nature of these public observations. This was a highly visible event, with potentially thousands of people witnessing the luminous sphere in the sky. The impact of the sighting was further amplified by the subsequent fascination with the camera footage showcased in newspapers and in official documents. The phenomenon began on the night of June 22, 1976, as residents of Tenerife, La Palma, and La Gomera reported seeing unusual lights in the sky. These lights and their maneuvers were unlike anything anyone had seen before. Local sightings reported that the phenomenon flew horizontally, stopped, or accelerated, and these observations were later interpreted by journalists as evidence supporting the idea of extraterrestrial ships. Newspaper headlines the following morning proclaimed that thousands of people had witnessed a spectacular phenomenon lasting 20 minutes, with the most sensational aspect being the sighting of a sphere occupied by strange alien beings. Intriguingly enough, it was the Spanish government who communicated this to the newspapers. The information was provided by a senior official of the Spanish Air Ministry, who wished to remain anonymous. The fact that such an authoritative source provided this information underscored the gravity of the sighting and alarmed the wider public. 3 days later, the commanding general of the Canary Island Air Zone appointed an investigative adjutant to analyze the events. His findings, forwarded by a Spanish Air Force general to journalist J.J. Benitez in 1976, quickly reached the broader public. Benitez's investigation formed the basis of his book, UFOs, Official Documents of the Spanish Government. Interest in the case was reignited in 1994 when the military files were released under Spain's version of the Freedom of Information Act. The 1976 report was extensive, containing over 100 pages of testimony, evaluations, drawings, and more. In the report, the phenomenon is described to have begun with what witnesses described as a strange sunset. As the sky darkened, zigzagging yellow lines with intense brightness emerged on the horizon, seemingly rising from the sea toward the cloud and moving along it. Over time, rings formed within the cloud, expanding to colossal sizes, and the cloud itself took on an iridescent and dense luminosity. At 8:08 p.m., a silver disk emerged from the horizon, in the same direction as the initial lines, leaving behind a zigzagging trail of reddish fire. It reached the lower part of the iridescent cloud, passed through it, jerked, and then ascended almost vertically, just 10 degrees below vertical. It then made a brief left turn, flew horizontally for a few seconds, and then ascended steeply again in a parabolic trajectory toward the islands. As it ascended, it left behind a massive luminous trail in the shape of a cone or wine glass, with the silver disc always at the tip. This enormous trail illuminated the Canary Islands, making the phenomenon visible even from Africa. The 94 report is ripe with interesting facts, but two internal memos from the Spanish Air Force stand out, both directed by the commanding general of the Canary Islands Air Command to the Lieutenant General of the Air Staff in Madrid. In the first memo, dated March 23rd, the general stated that, to counter the speculations these events are generating, and to curb certain unscrupulous individuals exploiting the public's good faith for their own benefit, it might be advisable to request information from the U.S. Armed Forces to see if they could publicize with certainty that the phenomenon was produced by them. The official Air Force report also included depositions from 14 witnesses. Witness reliability was assessed based on social status, with a doctor's report given high priority, whereas a common laborer's report was given less weight. Despite this unfair standard, all witnesses were in full agreement about what they saw, making the report detailed and chronological. Back to said doctor who on that very day, at 10:30 p.m., along with others, was surprised by the presence of a gigantic electric blue sphere that remained stationary 25 to 30 meters away and 2 meters above the ground. On June 22, 1976, at around 21:27 hours, Dr. Padron Leon was traveling by taxi with Santiago del Pino, the son of a sick woman he was on his way to treat. It was a clear, starry night. As they rounded a bend, the witnesses were startled to see a perfect sphere about 60 meters ahead of them, hovering a few meters off the ground. We were talking about hunting. As we entered the last part of the road, the car lights pointed at a slightly luminous sphere that was stationary and very close to the ground, although I can't say for sure if it was touching it. And we started to experience a terrible feeling of cold, Dr. Leon said in his statement to the Air Ministry. The chauffeur even started trembling, especially when the taxi's radio, which had been turned on, suddenly cut out. The sphere was transparent, like a gigantic soap bubble, with a diameter comparable to a 2-story house. Inside, they could see a platform, some panels, and 2 large beings. "Are you seeing what I am seeing?" he asked. The driver exclaimed, "My God, what is that?" The cab was only a short distance from the patient's house, and upon arriving, the doctor observed a type of bluish smoke coming from a tube rising through the center of the object. The bubble was made of a totally transparent and crystalline-like material, since it was possible to see the stars in the sky through it. The film had an electric blue color, though tenuous and not dazzling. It had a radius of about 30 meters, and in the lower third of the sphere, you could see a platform of aluminum-like color, as if made of metal, and there were 3 large consoles. At each side of the center, there were 2 huge figures of 2.5 to 3 meters tall, but no taller than 3 meters, dressed entirely in red and facing each other in such a way that I always saw their profile. The doctor continues, "We were surprised. It was majestic. It looked like the sphere was drawn with a compass. Inside, we could see tall beings dressed in red suits and black helmets. They faced each other. Around them were instruments with flashing lights. What surprised me most was the disproportionate size of their brains. Then I observed that the bluish smoke continued to spread from the semi-transparent central tube within the sphere, spreading across the periphery of its interior without leaking anything outside. Then the sphere began to grow and grow until it became huge like a 20-story house. But the platform and the crew remained the same size. It rose slowly and majestically, and it seems I heard a very tenuous whistling," said Dr. Padron. Another witness, a lady who was a relative of the patient, was watching television when suddenly the screen went blank and her dogs began to bark outside. Running to a window, she saw the doctor's cab and the blue sphere above it. She also noted that the sphere was transparent, with 2 blue lines inside. Shocked, she closed the windows and doors and began to pray. The home of the doctor's house call was only yards away. Dr. Leon left the vehicle as the craft continued to rise, ran to the house and started banging on the door and telling those inside to come out. They did, and they would see the sphere rising. It began to pick up speed. Eventually, at a blistering pace, it shot out of sight in the direction of Tenerife, transforming into a bright white beam. The sight of the ship erased all intellectual traces in the doctor, as he put it. That is to say, the doctor explains, traces of past experiences. I was left only with the image of the ship. I don't know if this relates to the physical or if it is something for psychiatrists to analyze. Another influence I experienced was a great sense of clairvoyance. After observing the ship, I noticed a great clarity in my intelligence for diagnosis and a strong confidence in myself, not only as a doctor, but also as a person, and from then on, a great confidence in the things I was going to do. This same UFO, or an identical one, was seen 2 minutes later on 4 other Canary Islands, Tenerife, La Palma, Gomera, by thousands of witnesses. At the same time, radars officially recorded the passage of a craft. A quick calculation established that the UFO, moving from the south of Fuerteventura to the north of Gran Canaria, had a speed of 3,060 kilometers per hour. As it were, on June 22, 1976, there was a real UFO tour over the Canary Islands, as an object was also seen south of Gran Canaria that night. They were leisurely photographed by a witness who was present. The 36 color photos he took were authenticated, and the apparent dimensions of the objects corresponded to the doctor's observation in Guia. Clearly, phenomena were observed in the Canary Islands on June 22, 1976, and the details were published at the end of March 1977. The numerous testimonies, those from the Spanish corvette captain, the radar data, the doctor's testimony in Guia, the photos, and the semi-official information are so consistent that the existence of the UFO phenomenon cannot be denied. Investigator Jose Benitez concludes in his article in LDLN. A local newspaper interviewed Dr. Padron shortly after the declassification of the documents, and by then, 18 years after the encounter, he shared additional details that further deepened the mystery. Back in 1976, Padron had already mentioned in his statement that he didn't feel fear during the encounter, but rather a strange sense of well-being and excitement. Now he claimed that the beings he encountered, despite not communicating with him, had the ability to erase memories and could implant visions or instructions in a person's mind for months or even years by placing an energy in the brain. Adding to the unsettling nature of his account, Dr. Padron cautioned the journalist not to dismiss his statements, claiming that in the past 3 years, 8 people who publicly doubted his credibility had died of cancer within 6 or 7 months. In 2016, 40 years after the sighting, science journalist Ricardo Campo visited the Las Rosas area and spoke with one of the children of the patient Dr. Padron Leon had treated. The child told him that not only had the doctor entered the house in a state of great nervousness, asking them to close the windows. For years afterward, it was common to see him in the area trying to spot the ship again, to the point that on one occasion, he had to be helped out of a ravine into which his car had slid. The observance of the craft by all who saw it was accepted as genuine, although no earthly explanation was at the time offered for its unique look and behavior. On the other hand, although the witnesses of the smaller orb with aliens were classified as reliable, the actual presence of the beings was questioned. In other words, the witnesses were believed to be truthful, but for many, what they claimed to have seen was too far-fetched. In 2001, science journalists Ricardo Campo and Vicente Juan Ballester Olmos uncovered what they believed to be the true cause of the phenomenon. After extensive research, which included interviewing witnesses and exploring the possibility of extraterrestrial involvement, they turned to ballistic missile data. Their investigation suggested that the sighting was caused by 2 Poseidon C-3 thermonuclear missiles launched by the U.S. Navy's submarine USS von Steuben on June 22, 1976. The missile's rapid ascent into the thermosphere likely caused intense atmospheric reactions, reflecting sunlight back to Earth and creating the bright, large-scale visual effects witnessed across the Canary Islands. As we wrap up today's episode, We wish to acknowledge the enduring intrigue that surrounds the 1976 Canary Islands UFO sighting. Despite thorough investigations and compelling evidence pointing towards a terrestrial explanation, there is still room for interpretation, speculation, and ongoing debate among those who believe that not all questions have been fully answered. Was it a single giant sphere dominating the sky, visible from multiple viewpoints, piercing people's perceptions and shaking their souls? Or were there multiple spheres, concealed in the shadows of the man-made blast, gliding through the luminous reverberation, harboring other intentions? In the military report, Dr. Padron Leon was ranked as one of the most credible witnesses. His professional authority, combined with the vivid detail of his description, has for many only deepened the mystery surrounding the sighting. What do you think? Are there still layers of doubt that need to be considered? As always, we will let you be the judge, and if you'd like, feel free to join the conversation in the comment section. This week, we would like to give a special thanks to Robert Maddox, Andrew L. and Dahouse for buying us coffee. If you also would like to buy us a coffee, see link in the description.